Welcome to The Journey. I'm Bob Glaze, President and General Manager of Southwest Radio Church. With me is Pastor Larry Sporgemino. A recent study by a leading insurance research group said that collision claims in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon were up 2.7% in the years since legal recreational marijuana sales began when compared with surrounding states. Matt Moore, Senior Vice President with the Highway Loss Data Institute, said, "We believe that the data is saying that crash risk has increased in these states, and those crash risks are associated with the legalization of marijuana."
Mason Vert, a marijuana legalization advocate and communications director with the Marijuana Policy Project, questioned the study and said, "The study raises more questions than it provides answers, and it's an area that should surely receive more study, and deservedly so," Vert said. Insurance industry groups have been keeping a close watch on claims when auto accidents across America began to go up in 2013 after more than a decade of steady decline. Insurance companies found several possible factors at play that included distracted driving through text or cell phone use, road construction, and an improved economy that has led to leisurely drives and more miles driven, as well as marijuana legalization.
Marijuana advocates claim that if alcohol is legal, it is no different than marijuana. They argue that no one dies from marijuana. Maybe no one dies from marijuana, but they do die from the drugs they take after getting started on marijuana. Marijuana is a gateway drug to other drugs. Marijuana is definitely a contributing factor. Marijuana users often become easy victims to hard drug pushers, extortioners, and sexual deviants. The use of marijuana weakens the ability to resist coercion and destroys the mind and will. Those who use marijuana lose many of their God-given inhibitions. It destroys the motivation to excel in work and studies.
Struggling against the forces of evil is always difficult. Why should we make it more difficult and perhaps impossible by making marijuana readily available? In His love and wisdom, God has given us warnings about the need to stay sober and alert. 1 Thessalonians 5, 6 through 8 says this, "Therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. Let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation." In 1 Peter 1:13 we read, "Wherefore gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." You know, Bob, it's hard to follow these exhortations unless we're fully awake.
That's right, Larry. And we must not forget what 1 Peter 5:8 tells us. Be sober, be vigilant, because the adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Whom resist? The devil is our adversary. Adversary originally meant an adversary in a lawsuit. If I'm going to face an adversary in a lawsuit, I want to be fully awake.
I've never used marijuana, but a medical website describes its effects this way. Marijuana users often describe the experience of smoking marijuana as initially relaxing and mellow, creating a feeling of haziness and lightheadedness. The user's eyes may dilate, causing colors to appear more intense, and other senses may be enhanced. Later, feelings of paranoia and panic may be felt by the user. I don't see any benefits in feeling lightheaded and then experiencing paranoia and panic.
The Bible tells us that we are now living in the last days. One of the characteristics of the last days is deception. Jesus warned His followers about being careful because there will be many false teachers. Many will claim to be the Christ. There will be those who will perform lying wonders and deceptive miracles. Those who use marijuana will be easy prey for deception. They are the ones who will take the mark of the beast.
The New Testament uses the word sorcery several times. It's a translation of the Greek word pharmakeia, from which we get our word pharmacy, which of course is a drugstore. Witchcraft and spiritism often involve the ritualistic use of magic potions and mind-controlling, mind-altering drugs. God brings judgment on Babylon of the future and says this, For by thy sorceries, pharmakeia, were all nations deceived. That's from Revelation 18:23. Using illicit drugs can open people to an invasion of demonic spirits. This evil entity known as Babylon will deceive all nations through drugs. The Apostle Paul speaks of the works of the flesh, and in Galatians 5:20, he refers to pharmakeia. The word is translated witchcraft. Now the works of the flesh are manifest. Which are these? Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, or pharmakeia. It looks like the legalization of marijuana is Satan's noose for the fulfillment of end-time prophecy.
Out of concern and Christian love, we strongly urge those who are contemplating the use of marijuana to think about the consequences of their intended actions.
The world is a scary place, and it gets scarier every day. This next segment ought to scare you.
Despite intensive security precautions and high-tech surveillance techniques and equipment, jihadist terrorists are still murdering people. Recent terrorist attacks in Manchester, London, Paris, Berlin, and the French Riviera indicate the jihadists are still doing their devilish work, murder and mayhem. As usual, many in the Western world seem to think the problem will just go away, like a case of the flu goes away. Denial is always easier than dealing with a major problem, until something horrific happens. Then people will demand an investigation and ask, why weren't we warned?
When Tom Clancy published The Sum of All Fears, dealing with a small atomic bomb being detonated at the Super Bowl, he was called a crackpot alarmist. Several government officials took him to task for leaking classified information about portable nukes, also known as suitcase nukes. This criticism led him to pen the following for the paperback edition, and I quote it. All the material in this novel relating to weapons technology is readily available in any one of dozens of books. I was first bemused, then stunned, as my research revealed just how easy such a project might be today. It is generally known that nuclear secrets are not as secure as we would like. In fact, the situation is worse than even well-informed people appreciate. What required billions of dollars in the 1940s is much less expensive. When I asked explicitly for specifications for the very machines used at Oak Ridge and at other nuclear facilities, they arrived Federal Express the next day. Some highly specialized items designed specifically for bomb manufacture may now be found in stereo speakers. The fact of the matter is that a sufficiently wealthy individual could, over a period of from 5 to 10 years, produce a multi-stage thermonuclear device. Science is all in the public domain and allows few secrets, close quotes.
Clancy penned those words in 1992. He was unaware of the fact that a wealthy person named Osama bin Laden was in Sudan with the plans to manufacture or purchase such a device. Sudan, Pakistan, and the Islamic republics that have broken away from Russia all have access to nuclear materials. Though The Sum of All Fears became an international bestseller, it was dismissed by some critics as the work of science fiction with technological explanations that belonged in the realm of the fantastic.
5 years later, The Peacemaker became the first movie from DreamWorks, a new studio created by Steven Spielberg and others. It starred George Clooney and Nicole Kidman. The story focuses on a group of Russian terrorists who steal 9 suitcase nukes from a train that is transporting them to a military center to be disarmed and defused. One soldier grumbles, "I didn't join the Russian army to dismantle it for the Americans." The train is destroyed by a nuclear blast to make it appear that all the bombs have been destroyed by the accident. Clooney, as a macho intelligence officer, joins Kidman to hunt down the thieves and uncover the weapons. After a series of hair-raising chases, they manage to recover all but one of the suitcase nukes, the one that has been purchased by a radical jihadist who takes it to New York City.
The movie was a dud, partly because some critics thought that the idea of a suitcase nuke being brought to New York City and detonated by a single agent was highly improbable and therefore not convincing. But are the premises of the Clancy novel and the Clooney movies simply make-believe, silly scenes that are in the realm of fantasy? Not really. A portable nuke, one weighing less than 60 pounds, but having the explosive yield of Little Boy, the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, was made to fit into a piece of travel luggage, is well within the realm of possibility. Moreover, testimony from intelligence sources that these weapons are in the hands of jihadists should be a matter of concern for every right-minded individual. Laughing at those who want to secure both our southern and northern borders should be regarded as a criminal offense.
Perhaps an even greater threat to America is not from a suitcase nuke, but from a so-called dirty bomb. Homeland Security defines a dirty bomb as a radiological dispersion device. Ordinary explosives, such as dynamite or other chemical explosives, are wrapped with radioactive materials in the form of powder or pellets. The idea behind a dirty bomb is to blast radioactive material into the area around the explosion. A business district in a large city could be irradiated so seriously that people would have to stay away, thus crippling an important financial district. The possibility of wind spreading the contamination to areas downwind provides a real health issue. No one knows the full extent of the health risk that would follow.
While it takes a great deal of expertise to make a nuclear detonation involving a fission reaction, just about anyone who has access to radioactive materials can make a dirty bomb. The Washington Post reported in March of 2002 that the Bush administration's consensus view was that Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda terrorist network probably had such radioactive contaminants as strontium-90 and cesium-137. Small amounts had disappeared from various facilities. In January of 2003, British officials found documents in the Afghan city of Herat that led them to conclude that al-Qaeda had successfully built a dirty bomb. In late 2003, Homeland Security officers worried that al-Qaeda would detonate a dirty bomb during New Year's Eve celebrations or college football games. The Department of Energy sent scores of undercover nuclear scientists with radiation detection equipment to key locations in 5 major cities.
On October the 7th, 2015, the New York Post printed an Associated Press report unveiling a smuggling ring that is trying to help ISIS make a dirty bomb. Nuclear smugglers are looking for terrorist buyers who are willing to pay large sums of money for U-235 and cesium-135. The AP reports that there have been 4 attempts in 5 years in which criminal networks with suspected Russian ties sought to sell radioactive material to extremists through Moldova. Investigators uncovered an attempt to sell bomb-grade uranium to a buyer from the Middle East.
Many of us remember the deadly suicide attack at the airport in Belgium that occurred in March of 2016 and killed 32 civilians. Perpetrators were part of the same terrorist cell which had been involved in the November 2015 attacks. Perhaps more significant, but often ignored, is the fact that the perpetrators were planning to kidnap a Belgian nuclear scientist. This had raised concerns that the 2 terrorists were seeking to secure radioactive material for a dirty bomb.
Unfortunately, most Americans do not realize how serious our porous border situation really is. The news gets caught up in trivialities, but says nothing about the real danger we all face. We are all deeply indebted to Almighty God for keeping us safe. In the words of the prophet Jeremiah in Lamentations chapter 3, it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. While we are truly thankful for God's faithfulness, we also need to wake up and not presume on the goodness of God. He warns us and calls us to be diligent watchmen. Have we heeded his warnings?
Freedom is a wonderful thing in the United States. You can work and live anywhere you want. You can also buy 100 acres and start your own army.
The Clarion Project seeks to challenge radical Islam and promote human rights. It recently gave a report titled Radical Islam in New York and New Jersey. Are there radical Islamics in New York and New Jersey? A report given by the Clarion Project and other credentialed sources gives a resounding yes.
In September 2016, a pressure cooker bomb exploded in the Chelsea neighborhood of New York City, injuring 30 people. Soon after, a pipe bomb went off at a charity race in Seaside Park, New Jersey. Multiple bombs were also found at the train station in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Ahmad Khan Rahimi is a naturalized U.S. citizen, originally from Afghanistan. He was captured following a shootout with police outside a bar in Linden, New Jersey. Rahimi was not part of an identifiable terrorist group, but his bomb actions were believed to have been influenced by the extremist Islamic ideology espoused by al-Qaeda.
Another example is Imam Mohammed Qatanami, an imam of the Islamic Center in Passaic County in New Jersey. He came to America in 1996. He was tried in 2008 on charges of failing to disclose a conviction for being a member of Hamas, the Gaza-based Muslim Brotherhood affiliate, which is designated by the U.S. government as a terrorist group. The court dismissed the case, but in December of 2016, the Department of Homeland Security appealed, and Qatanami is now being retried. Despite his terrorist connections, Qatanami is known to be close with New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who has publicly defended Qatanami. Clarion discovered in 2012 that 4 Islamists, including Qatanami, were members of Christie's Muslim Outreach Committee. Christie called for criticism of his record on terrorism, internet blog BS. Several other individuals in the New York, New Jersey area have been charged with attempting to join ISIS in Syria. In 2016, the FBI arrested an Uber driver. He was allegedly attempting to join the Islamic State and expressing support for a proposed terror attack to run people over with a garbage truck in Times Square.
Another group is the Muslims of the Americas, closely tied to the Pakistani-based extremist sect Jamaat al-Fuqra. In 1998, the U.S. State Department said al-Fuqra is, quote, an Islamic sect that seeks to purify Islam through violence, close quotes. The group is headed by extremist preacher Sheikh Mubarak Ali Galani. He is on record as saying, and I quote him, "We are fighting to destroy the enemy. We are dealing with evil at its roots, and its roots are America," close quotes. Their headquarters is a 70-acre paramilitary compound in upstate New York called Islamburg. The group had been told to arm themselves and prepare to violently resist expected raids on the group's 22 compounds. Yes, 22 compounds across the United States. The compound, known as Islamburg, is located in beautiful Delaware County near Hancock in upstate New York. Some reports on Islamburg claim that it is a peaceful community of friendly people who just want peace and quiet in the mountains. However, the Clarion Project and Dr. Paul Williams in his book, The Day of Islam and the Annihilation of America in the Western World, tell a very different story. Nearly every weekend, gunfire can be heard coming from the compound. One neighbor, who stated that he is a combat veteran of Vietnam, said some of the weapons are automatic and of large caliber. Recently, area residents heard 2 small explosions coming from the compound.
In the years following the original 9/11, terrorists appear to be prevailing, thriving, and yes, winning. They have mounted horrific attacks in Tunisia, Bali, Mombasa, Riyadh, Istanbul, Jakarta, Madrid, Paris, Berlin, and London. ISIS has left a trail of blood and terror and is now seeking to gain a toehold in the Philippines. Most significantly, while President Trump seems to be fully aware of the danger we face and is trying to rectify the situation, he is considered to be a monster by many. Any attempt to increase border security or to vet individuals from countries with known jihadist proclivities is deemed a crime against humanity. If fanatical jihadists release sarin gas in New York City subways, that would also be a crime against humanity.
Marriage is hard. We've all heard that half of all marriages end in divorce. But does that mean you failed as a person?
Lisa Turkis, Proverbs 31 Ministries president, prolific author and popular speaker, announced the end of her marriage. In a recent blog she wrote, and I quote her, "Anyone who knows me in Proverbs 31 Ministries know how seriously I take marriage. I've always encouraged women to fight for their marriages and to do everything possible to save them when they come under threat. So for the past couple of years, I've been in the hardest battle of my life, trying to save my marriage." Turkis, who had been married 25 years, said her husband was unfaithful multiple times and abused substances. The couple attempted intensive counseling for 18 months, but Turkis said her husband refused to reconcile their marriage. After a season of rest, Turkis says she will continue with her ministry and speaking engagements. Naghmeh Panahi, ex-wife of former persecuted pastor Saeed Abedini, was among Turkis's strongest supporters. Just a year after his release from an Iranian prison, Pastor Abedini's marriage came to a stormy end. Abedini had posted criticisms of Franklin Graham, president of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, and Samaritan's Purse, claiming that they used him for personal gain. Though Lisa Turkis has had some supporters, others are somewhat critical of her divorce. The editors of the Black Christian News Network said, "Lisa, we recommend that you let someone like Lois Evans, the wife of Tony Evans, or Nancy DeMoss take over Proverbs 31 Ministries, at least temporarily. No one is condemning you, but you need to admit that you were not perfect in your marriage either, and we urge you to reconcile with your husband." Close quotes. They also added the following comment. "As the reason for continuing your ministry, you stated that you were determined not to let darkness win. Well, the way you do that is by not letting darkness win over your family, by reconciling with your husband and getting your family back together," they concluded.
In our next segment, Dr. Bob and Pastor Larry discuss a couple that had to fight to save their marriage. You might think they wouldn't have to.
The home and the family are in deep trouble. Satan is having untold victories. It seems that when an imperfect man, a sinner to use the biblical terminology, marries an imperfect woman, you got a formula for a heartbreak.
Young men and young women are looking for the perfect spouse. They hope to have a lovely wedding, and after it will be said of them, "and they lived happily ever after." Quite often it doesn't work out that way. So we have to ask, can imperfect people survive an imperfect marriage?
Kay Warren is the co-founder of Saddleback Church with her husband, Rick Warren. Kay recently authored a book titled Sacred Privilege, Your Life and Ministry as a Pastor's Wife. Rick and Kay write that they are both very imperfect. She even calls their marriage an ill-advised union.
In her book, Kay Warren writes, and I quote her, "I don't approach this subject from the Hallmark card version of marriage, but from the blood, sweat, and tears of the trenches where our marriage was forged and is sustained. I know what it's like to choose to build our relationship, to seek marriage counseling again and again, to allow our small group and our family into the struggle, to determine one more time to say, let's start over, and please forgive me, I was wrong, and I forgive you. I've learned to choose to focus on what is good and right and honorable in my husband instead of what drives me crazy, to turn attraction to another man into attraction to my husband."
Kay was molested when she was 5 and then addicted to pornography in her teen years. Kay writes that she was miserable and knew that she was not living in a way that pleased the Lord. When she was 17, she met Rick Warren at an evangelism training camp. On one date, Rick said, "Will you marry me?" In her book, Kay writes, "With my 19-year-old understanding of life, romance, God, His will, faith, and my desire to be obedient to Him, I said yes." Kay Lewis and Rick Warren got engaged.
They were married shortly thereafter. Kay writes, "Our brand new marriage took an instant nosedive. We didn't even make it to the end of our 2-week honeymoon in British Columbia before we knew our relationship was in serious trouble." Close quotes.
We often read Ephesians 5 with such a sense of familiarity that we don't even let the word sink in. We think we know what it says, Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his own wife loveth his own body. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth it and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. Very familiar words, but do we really understand what they mean?
Rick and Kay are not trying to change the past, but they are trying to please God in the future. Kay closes the chapter by writing, "We've beaten the odds that divorce would be the outcome of our ill-advised union. We've weathered my breast cancer and melanoma. We've survived the mental illness and suicide of our own son, Matthew. And now we know. We know we are the best thing that has ever happened to each other. I am in love with the man God brought into my life so many years ago."
It's not the kind of romance that would make a popular movie, but it does glow with humility and commitment.
In 1 Peter 2 and verse 21 and following, we read the following words, "For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who when he was reviled, reviled not. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously." Thank you once again for joining us on The Journey. Be sure to be with us for our next telecast. Can you imagine teaching a Sunday school class composed of learned scientists? Is it possible that they might ask a tough question that you could not answer? Sometimes, however, little children ask the really tough ones, like the little girl who asked her Sunday school teacher, "Who made God?" How would you answer that question? The assumption in this question is that everything has a beginning. Since God exists, he must also have had a beginning. The truth is quite simple. God is eternal. He has no beginning and no end. The question, "Who made God?" assumes that God was caused. Christians don't believe that everything was caused, but rather we believe that whatever began was caused. We don't believe that God began. He dwells in the eternal present. He is the I am of Exodus 3:14. We can find comfort in the fact that our God is eternal and that God is still on the throne, and prayer changes things.